It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back to Podcast by George. I entitled the show when I started at News, Blues, and Interviews. I haven't had a chance to get a lot of blues on, although we're going to have the String Prophets on doing some music off their new Christmas album. So we're going to get a break. The news has just been overwhelming. And of course, top of the charts when it comes to the news is COVID-19, coronavirus, and the vaccines, and the raging epidemic now across the heartland. We've kind of lost sight, I think, sometimes of what exactly is happening because we're all enthralled with this vaccine news. And that's part of the reason that I wanted to bring our good friend, our expert, back to Podcast by George. It's Dr. Andrew Nish. Doctor, welcome back to the PBG.
Thanks, George. Nice to be here this morning.
Well, you know, I had a show on here recently where I was on a rant and I was complaining about the fact I was kind of surprised and shocked, I guess maybe kind of in the who's naive category. When I saw what was happening over the Thanksgiving break, and we talked to you right before that, I thought, oh, my God, I can't believe this. They're really jumping on airplanes and traveling around the country by the millions to celebrate Thanksgiving with family and friends in the midst of a pandemic. Yep, that's what they did. They came back home and almost immediately they got in line for what? To get tested for COVID-19 because they were afraid they had exposed themselves, which is not silliness. I guess according to the CDC, they're telling some people if you did that, consider yourself exposed. I mean, and act accordingly. Doc, what's your take? Where are we at today across the nation and here in the great state of Iowa? What's our status?
Well, so we're at about the time where we'll begin to see an increase in cases because of exposure over Thanksgiving. We're at day 7, day 8. And it'll just be interesting in the next few days to see if we see another spike. Yeah.
Well,
in California, they're shutting down again in California. Restaurants will be closing, no outside dining, only takeaway, because their ICUs are filling up and they're critically worried about that. So, we will see more spikes. We'll see this post-Thanksgiving spike. I don't know how, big it'll be, but yeah, it's been an interesting ride. And, my wife and I, people ask, well, what'd you do for Thanksgiving? I said, well, my wife and I and 2 Cornish game hens had Thanksgiving together, and it's just interesting. And I'll philosophize a little bit here because, my wife and I were perfectly content by ourselves. We did a big Zoom conference with all of our family. And we just have this mindset of we can't be happy or we can't be satisfied without external gratification. And I just really want to, again, encourage people to internally look at themselves and just be content with who they are and what they are, and not necessarily need all these external influences to make themselves happy. We're just in that time and this will end. It's sort of like everybody, well, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? I'm like, well, we're just staying home and it's my wife and I, and oh, that's too bad. And I'm like, I've been alive for almost 62 years and it's one day, it's one meal out of the year. And I just don't consider it a big deal. And I got to Zoom with everybody. So we just have to adopt a little bit different mindset.
Well, that's what shocked and appalled me. I mean,
it didn't shock me. I mean, we're just so, and we are, and this is not to say we are social creatures. We need community, and people are so starved for community that they're willing to sort of forego the risk of the virus and do whatever. And I want to emphasize again, we're not out of this pandemic. Okay. We've got 9 months, a year, whatever it might be left. So I just plead with people to use this time to look at your life and look at yourself and what gives you happiness. It's your internal contentment with wherever you are, and it's not the external stimuli that we all think are important for our happiness.
I'm going to put this up on the screen here, and I think you'll be able to look at this too. Here, Iowa is what happens when government does nothing. This is out of the Atlantic, folks. We're in the Atlantic. This just released yesterday. The story of the coronavirus in the state is one of government inaction in the name of freedom and personal responsibility. Okay, so let's get that. Let's see if I can get that off the screen there. And what they're predicting, what you see a little lower in that article, they're talking about the fact we've started to hit these daily highs in fatalities, which is what jumps off the page at me. We're been in that 20 to 30 range, which is high for the state of Iowa. They're saying because of this Thanksgiving surge that you spoke of, that the fatalities could go to 80 a day in the state of Iowa. Like you said, nobody knows for sure what's going to happen here, but I guess the question for you, being very knowledgeable about the state's medical system, are we prepared to handle this amount of sickness and illness and death and dying because of the coronavirus? My sense was the system was kind of at the breaking point, even the last time that we talked, and it could get, it sounds like, exponentially worse.
Yeah, so this you have to remember the system is not static, it's dynamic. So we think in terms of, oh, we have X number of beds. And that may be physically true, but then the question is, do we have the staff to staff all of these beds? And that's where the real concern is right now, is we've got a lot of staff out being quarantined because they've been exposed or because they have the coronavirus. We have staff that are exhausted and overworked. So it may not be the physical limitations of beds. It may be, can we staff all of this? And so that's a dynamic number. That's not static. And so to say, oh, it's no problem, we got plenty of beds. Well, the next question is, do we have plenty of staff to take care of those people in those beds? And that's going to fluctuate with the disease prevalence. So as we get more prevalence in the community, we're going to have more staff out under investigation, quarantining because they've been exposed. And so there's not a really simple short answer for that, to say, oh, we got 3,000 beds, no problem. Well, we might have 3,000 beds, but we only have staff to staff 2,000 of them. So we have to continue to monitor this closely. But again, we have to plead with the public, please do your part. And that is continue to social distance, continue to wear a mask at all times when you're around other people, and wash your hands and practice good hygiene. So, before we leave this, but what happened basically, before we leave that discussion, I'll underline what I said in the earlier podcast. I was surprised. I really was shocked, honest to God, because millions of people went and did this. I got news for you, folks. Millions of those people that went and had Thanksgiving with friends and family and they're standing in the COVID lines, they're the same folks that were bitching about Donald Trump not doing what he needed to do, himself not even quarantining and wearing a mask and that type of thing. And then I don't know, not the earliest opportunity, but the big opportunity that they had, Thanksgiving, they went out and did the same thing. But that's just my own personal rant. Okay, I wanted to go from what happened to basically what's going to happen, and hopefully very soon. And that's kind of the starting point for this. The vaccines. We're hearing reports that this fast track, this warp speed thing has developed vaccines that Pfizer and Moderna are ready to roll, and that people are going to be getting these on the front line. Some of these medical professionals that you talked about, people in nursing homes, maybe by the end of this month. I just, my first question for you, is that a practical expectation? Do you see that happening, or are we talking about very small samples around the country? Yeah, so let's go through how this vaccine, what the approval process is, because I think there's lots of confusion about that.
Yeah.
We got a letter, my in-laws are at a nursing facility, and they said, oh, the FDA is going to approve this December 10th. That's not true. So the next process for the vaccine is on December 10th, there will be a group meeting, and it's called the Vaccine and Related Biologic Products Advisory Committee. Mm. And so this is an independent committee of experts in infectious disease, vaccinology, and virology. And they will have looked at the data from Pfizer, and they will scrutinize that data, and they will make a recommendation to the FDA about emergency use authorization approval. That then goes to the FDA, and then the FDA has to scrutinize the data, which they're doing, and then they have to make a final decision of giving an emergency use authorization for this vaccine. So December 10th is not the FDA approving this vaccine. December 10th is this advisory committee looking at the data and making their recommendation. Then it goes to the FDA. If there are no problems with the data and the data seems in line, what we all think, then it could be a few days and the FDA may give this emergency use authorization and we can begin to distribute the vaccine. But those are all ifs. Is there a problem with the data? Are there things that we're seeing in the data that give us pause, whether it be side effects, whether it be efficacy? So these are all things that are going to have to be done in a stepwise process and have to be done in a very scientific method. This can't be rushed. Can't be rushed. And so, December 10th, everybody's thinking, well, great, the 11th, the vaccine will be approved. That's just not true. That's the recommendation from this advisory board to the FDA. And then the next meeting, I believe, is December 17th, and that's to go over the Moderna data. So we could be, what's the date today? Today's the 4th, right?
Yeah.
So they don't meet for almost another week. We could be 2 weeks before we see an approval for a vaccine. Well, that puts us into late December. And once it's approved, they're already manufacturing the vaccine, so there are doses available. But already we're seeing indications that there's supply chain problems. And we know that's going to be true because we don't have a supply chain that will allow us to make hundreds of millions of doses. And so I think we're going to see, a gradual rollout of vaccine. It's not going to be this enormous number of vaccinations. But I think we have to be patient. And the news is, again, we talked a little bit about this. There's sort of a disservice like, oh, they're meeting on December 10th and December 11th, we're going to have a vaccine. That just isn't true. And that information is being disseminated. And it's just, we have to be patient. We all want a magic bullet, and that's the way we operate in this country, but we have to have patience with this process. This process has been speeded up by orders of magnitude. Usually it takes years to develop vaccines. To develop a vaccine in 9 months is an incredibly fast process. And so I want people to be prepared that you're not going to get a vaccine before Christmas for most of us. And the other thing that we don't know, George, is, we've prioritized healthcare workers and we've prioritized elderly people in nursing homes. But once the data is analyzed by the advisory board and the FDA, they may only approve it for certain age groups. So, if you're 80, it's very possible, based on the data, that they may not approve this vaccine for emergency use authorization for 85-year-olds. So, to think that every age group out there is going to be able to get this vaccine, we don't know the answer to that yet. So we have to be patient and let the scientists and the scientific process and the approval process move forward without government intervention. And, if I thought about this last night, pictured myself on this advisory board, and think about the pressure these people are under to approve this vaccine.
Yes.
They have to have incredible fortitude to say, whoa, wait a minute, there's something here we don't really like. And it's going to take a lot of guts, if the data isn't good, to slow the process down.
Well, and let's talk about that process a little bit, maybe get this one out of the way, because this was one of my questions. Back in mid-November, I had Gerald Posner, the great investigative reporter and American writer, on the podcast, and he's taken 5 years to write a book called Pharma. He knows all about the pharmaceutical industry and its history. I mean, he really dove deep on this thing. Excellent book. Pharma. Recommend that to anybody. But I put the question to him. I said, based on your experience with Pfizer as an example, and he's looked at them over the past 100 years or something like that almost, or are you confident in a vaccine that they would come up with and promote? Now, this was in mid-November. Mm-hmm. And what he told me basically was, George, what you're seeing so far right now anyway, really are the press releases. He said, I'm not going to be first in line to take this thing based on my knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry and Pfizer in specific, based on what I've seen thus far. Well, I mean, that was in mid-November. That's when the news releases first came out about the vaccine. Now, the testing process, it continues. And my question for you from a medical perspective, do you have any qualms at all about this fast track? Are you completely comfortable that if and when this thing is available to some people, even maybe the end of this month, it's okay to take it?
Yeah, so I think, and this has been emphasized in the medical community innumerable times, that there are multiple independent review boards that are going to be looking at this. And so when I talk about the vaccine and related biologic products review board, advisory board, these are people that are not tied to pharma. They're not tied to the FDA. They're research academic scientists in the country. And so that's an independent review board, but then the FDA has to review it as well. So yes, there have been, and I'm not a scholar of pharma history, okay? I have my skepticisms about pharma because they're in the business to sell drugs. They've created some good drugs. They've also created some disasters. So it goes both ways. I am pretty confident, I'm confident actually, that this vaccine will be effective and it will be safe. And if somebody said, if it's approved through this advisory board and the FDA approved it, would you get it? I would say, yes, I would. Yes, I would. There's too many eyes on this to have a sham. I mean, there's too much scrutiny. So I really believe in the process and I believe in the scientists. I mean, I've listened to Paul Offit is one of the premier vaccinologists in this country. He's at Children's Hospital at University of Pennsylvania. I've listened to multiple podcasts by him. And, he's been doing it for 35 years. I trust what he says and he's on this panel. So I think we can trust the process, yes.
All right, let's check that one off. My next big question, and God, I can't believe we're starting to get close to time here. Before we lose you today, this is one that I wondered about all along. So you've got Pfizer and Moderna. They're kind of on this parallel track. They've got this same kind of vaccine, this deep freezing, and the issues related to that with distribution, which can be problematic. Then you've got J&J, which you've talked about before. They're out there working on a vaccine that's completely different from a science standpoint, as I understand it. It's a one-shot vaccine, and it doesn't, if I understand correctly, doesn't have to be deep frozen like the other two. Well, okay, let's say that Pfizer and Moderna are out there, and they're starting to get their vaccines out there, and then J&J comes along and says, hey, we got this vaccine that works just as well. It only takes one shot, so you're only going to have one side effect round, and it doesn't have to be deep frozen. What's that do to the supply chain? What's that do to the methodology and the process of getting everybody vaccinated in the country?
I don't think I know the answer to that. It will take multiple vaccines to vaccinate everybody in this country, and it'll be interesting to see what their data shows. Yes, it's a different vaccine. It's called a attenuated viral vector vaccine. So it's the way vaccines have been made in the past. But I just don't know the answer to that. I mean, everybody's looking at it as, okay, the Moderna and the Pfizer product is a 2-shot vaccine. That's a bit of a logistical nightmare because you have to give the dose and then 3 to 4 weeks later, you have to give the second dose of the same vaccine. You can't mix vaccines here. And so we're really kind of worried about the logistics of getting people back and making sure they're getting the appropriate dose. So a single dose would be a big boom, but it's going to take everybody, okay? If J&J's is highly effective, it's not going to put the Moderna and the Pfizer products out of business. It's going to take a group effort here, okay? It's going to take a village. Because to give 300 million people this vaccine, no one company is going to be able to do that. So, and then the other thing we have to remember, and I want to emphasize this again, is let's say December 20th, the vaccine is approved. And I'm just throwing that date out just as a date.
Christmas present.
You have to remember, you're going to get the first dose, and then you're not going to get the second dose for 3 to 4 weeks. And then even after the second dose, it's going to be another 2 to 3 weeks before you've actually developed immunity. So there's a 6-week lag time. So even though you get the dose on December 20th, you're not going to be immune till mid-February. So we have to remember that too. Just because you got the vaccine injected into your arm does not mean you have a passport to go do whatever you want.
Well, and here's a quick hitter for you on that line that I had. Let's say I get the vaccine. So I think I'm pretty well protected. I mean, with a 90% rate. Can I asymptomatically, can I be exposed to it, not get it myself, but go out and give it to other people that haven't been vaccinated accidentally? Does it work that way?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if we know. If we might know it and I don't, but I'm not sure we know the answer to that question. So again, even though you've been vaccinated, until we can follow large groups of people over time to see what's happening, how effective is it, with huge populations? We've only done very small studies. In a vaccination study, we usually study hundreds of thousands of people. So you have to remember these studies with 30 and 40,000 are very small for a vaccine project. So it's going to be incumbent, and that's why they're not going to get, when you get an emergency use authorization, this is still considered an experimental drug because they've not gotten the full authorization. So the FDA will be demanding significant follow-up as we vaccinate more and more people. And so the answer to that question is, if I get the vaccine, can I still carry the virus and expose other people? I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, that's all right, Dr. Nish, and I can tell just by talking with you that you were surprised at warp speed and at how quickly these vaccines were created and where we're at right now. And that leads me maybe to my final question, and I'll give you the final word here, as always. And this is my vested thing, and I can't get away from this. We've talked about this before. Anytime something medical this important comes up, always think of my sister. Died of ALS. ALS, completely different disease. Okay, it's not a virus. It's not something that you can get a vaccine for like what we're talking about. But look at how quickly, with all hands on deck, with all resources, we were able to come up with this vaccination for this deadly COVID virus. Is there any reason to believe that science has moved ahead enough that maybe some of these other things like ALS, if they were dealt with in the same manner with the same resources, that we could finally see some progress on that? Or is it just two completely different, incompatible worlds that have no bearing one on the other?
Yeah, I would go with the latter, because we're dealing with an infectious disease. So we're dealing with a specific single organism, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, that we're trying to develop a vaccine against. ALS, we honestly have no idea what the cause of ALS is. So if you get COVID, as symptomatic COVID, we know what caused that, and now we're developing a treatment for that, meaning the vaccine. If you get ALS, we honestly have no idea why you got it. Completely different things. The other thing about it is, and this is just the reality of medicine, ALS is a tiny, tiny proportion of people who get disease. So it's not quite an orphan disease where there's only a handful of people and it's very expensive to develop treatments. But it's also very different because we don't know the etiology of it.
All right. Well, that was my little point of reference personally, and I didn't want to get off track here particularly.
Yeah, no, let's talk about that, though, because ALS kills a very small number of people a year, and I'm sorry that it killed one of your family members. But let's look at, we've had 270,000 deaths from COVID.
Yeah.
Let's put that in perspective. How many people die of cancer every year in this country? About 610,000. How many people die of heart disease? About 700 and some thousand. So, we have to put these things in perspective, that yes, the COVID is a definite tragedy, but we still have the two leading causes of death in this country, cancer and heart disease, causing 1.5 million deaths. So, it's chronic diseases, heart disease, dementia, cancer, autoimmune diseases. Probably 80% of those are environmentally related. Poor nutrition, poor health habits, stress, anxiety, and things like that. So it's not as simple as developing, and we know drugs, we develop a drug to control your cholesterol. When you look at the number of people who come to the hospital with heart attacks, over half of them have normal cholesterol. So it's not a single point entity like an infectious disease. It's a multiple lifestyle factors. And that's probably true of almost all diseases we see in Western medicine.
Well, let's do what we should do, folks, so we don't, nobody wants to see COVID catch up in a year with any of those other diseases that have traditionally been killing us by the millions. Doc, we got to get out of here today. I wanted to give you the last word. Any thought that you had going in here that you wanted to make sure people were thinking about and best practices or whatever you want to talk about here as we close the podcast?
You know what? It's not going to change. I talk about this every time. And number one, we're in it for the long haul. Be prepared to continue to mask, socially distance, and good hand hygiene for at least the next 9 to 12 months. We have to have that mindset. And number two, continue to work on your own personal satisfaction. Work on your inner happiness and inner self. Because we rely too much on external stimuli to make us satisfied. Yet, as John Kabat-Zinn says, wherever you go, there you are. And just be there. And don't hearken for the world that was. Be in the present moment and wish for a world that's better. Who wants to go back to what we were, this racist, bigoted country, when we can now reset and we can be a better society? We can be a better society. So think about what you can personally do to make yourself compassionate and content with where you are now. And you'll get through this fine.
Doc, you know how to close a podcast. I'll tell you, that's great advice,
I wish
folks.
Everybody the best. And I can't emphasize that enough. I wish no ill harm to anybody in this world, including our illustrious president. And I just have compassion for everything. And when you do that, you can change how you feel and you can change your mindset. And you can enjoy every minute of life, COVID or no COVID. Life is short, and who knows how short it might be for all of us. And it's too short to go through it as being angry or resentful or vengeful. It's just too short. It eats you alive.
Oh, those are great words, great sentiments, Doc. I really appreciate it. It's always good to talk to you, and I appreciate you coming on a podcast by George again, and already looking forward to the next time.
Maybe
Doc,
next time
again.
We'll have a needle stuck in our arm. Who knows?
Folks, that's Dr. Andrew Nish. He's the expert, really, on the COVID virus for a podcast by George. He knows what he's talking about, and he's always got great advice for the mental side of this as well, which it's not even fair to say that, as he and I have talked about. I mean, it's all interwoven. It's all one thing, mental and physical. It all works together. So,
as my meditation instructor says, the quality of your day is entirely dependent on the quality of your mind.
Well,
so take that.
We will take that. That's going to wrap it up. That's going to close out this edition of Podcast by George. And folks, if you like these shows, please follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, ring the notification bell so that you get each and every episode, and then share it. I mean, pass this around so that we can grow this thing. Got a big following on Facebook and iTunes, but I'm trying to get particularly some growth, starting to get it going here a little bit on YouTube. But that's going to wrap it up for now. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.